Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The air was electric with excitement as Tony Stark stepped onto the stage. Cameras flashed, journalists whispered, and the world's leaders leaned forward in their seats. Stark, ever the showman, smiled at the crowd before him. The backdrop of towering screens displayed sleek renderings of his latest invention, the Exo-Guardian suit. Today he wasn't chosen just unveiling another Iron Man suit. No, this was something far more groundbreaking. A suit designed not for a superhero, but for the everyday man and woman. Stark began, his voice resonating through the auditorium. We live in a world of threats, alien invasions, rogue nations, terrorists. Paris, he paused for effect, eyes gleaming. And few powerful individuals to protect us. That's not enough. It's only time for humanity to take control of its own future. The crowd erupted into applause. Stark gestured to the giant screens behind him, where a model of the Exo-Guardian turned slowly, showcasing its sleek, metallic design. It wasn't as bulky as the Iron Man armor, sleeker, more lightweight, but packed with power. In the wrong hands, it could be devastating. Clark Kent, sitting toward the back of the room in his civilian disguise as a mild-mannered reporter, felt an uneasy knot tighten in his stomach. To his left, Lois Lane was busy taking notes, her fingers flying across her tablet's screen. Clark leaned toward her. "What do you think?" Lois didn't look up, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Ty, I think this is going to sell like crazy. Governments are going to eat it up." But Ty, she paused, finally glancing at him. "What's that? That look on your face, Smallville." Clark sighed, glancing at Stark on stage. "I just don't know if giving ordinary people this kind of power is the right idea." Loyu smirked, arching a brow, spoken like a man who can bench press a continent. "You know people want to feel safe too, Clark." "Sure," Clark replied, his voice low and serious. "Yeah, but what happens when that kind of power gets into the wrong hands?" As Stark continued his presentation, Clark's unease grew. He had seen too many times how power could corrupt, how even the best intentions could lead to disaster. And now Stark was offering this dangerous technology to the world. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was a mistake. After the presentation ended, Stark mingled with the crowd, shaking hands and posing for photos. Clark decided it was time to ask the man directly. Excusing himself from Lois, he wove through the sea of attendees, making his way to the front. "Mr. Stark," Clark called as he approached, his voice calm but firm. "Drake Clark Kent, Daily Planet." Stark turned, a broad grin spreading across his face as he extended his hand. "Dia Kent," the man with the glasses. "What can I do for you?" Clark shook his hand but wasted no time getting to the point. "Sure, you really think it's such a good idea to mass-produce something this powerful? What happens when these suits end up in the wrong hand?" Stark's grin did he falter, but there was a slight shift in his posture. "Hey, look, Kent, I get it. You're concerned, but the world's such a dangerous place. People need to be able to defend themselves. It's not just about governments or armies. This tech gives ordinary people the chance to stand up against the bad guys." Clark shook his head slightly. "That's the problem. Not everyone is going to use this technology responsibly. That's why we have checks and balances," Stark said smoothly. "Clearly, we're not handing these suits out like candy at Halloween. Only trusted parties will have access." Clark's eyes narrowed. "You're not considering the full picture, Tony. Power like this, once it's signed out there, you can true control it." Stark's grin finally faded,
replaced by a more serious expression.
Kent,
"I respect you, but don't you lecture me on responsibility. I've been in the business of saving the world for years, and if I am honest, people like you superheroes. You set the bar too high. Regular folks deserve a chance to fight back too."
Clark's jaw tightened, but before he could reply, a commotion broke out near the entrance of the auditorium. Stark saw a security detail rushed forward, surrounding him. Clark caught a glimpse of a man in tactical gear being escorted out. "Just a minor disturbance," Stark said, glancing over prey. "Probably someone trying to get a closer look at the tech." But Clark wasn't so sure. Something about the man's demeanor, the way he carried himself, set off alarms in his mind. And if there was one thing Clark had learned, it was to trust his instinct. As Stark turned back to continue his conversation with another group of reporters, Clark made a quick excuse and headed outside, his senses alert. The man from earlier was gone, but there was something in the air, an ominous feeling that only seemed to grow stronger. Back at the Daily Planet, Clark's mind raced. He knew he couldn't just sit back and watch this unfold. Stark's technology in the wrong hands could spell disaster, and he had a bad feeling that was exactly what was going to happen. A few days later, the headlines across the world read Stark Industries prototype stolen. Clark stared at the front page of the Daily Planet, his worst fears realized. He immediately contacted Stark, arranging a meeting at the billionaire's headquarters. The sleek glass and steel of Stark Tower loomed over the city as Clark arrived. Inside, Stark was a flurry of motion, barking orders to his security team. "Why how the hell did this happen?" Stark muttered under his breath as he typed furiously at his console. "Tony," Clark said. Stepping into the room, Stark barely acknowledged him, still focused on the dozens of holographic screens floating in front of him. "Not now. Kind of busy dealing with the end of the world. Which is why I am here. You've just got to let me help." Stark finally looked up, his face lined with frustration. "Help? How exactly are you planning on helping? I've already got S.H.I.E.L.D. on this. The best tech in the world, tracking it down." "You said it yourself," Clark interrupted. "This could be the end of the world if those terrorists get the suit, sec, and use it to build an army. Army, Stark scoffed, but his eyes betrayed concern. "Look, it's so bad, I'll admit, but we've got protocols in place." Clark crossed his arms, his voice firm. "Yeah, they'll break those protocols, and if they manage to reverse engineer your tech, who knows what kind of destruction they could cause." Stark paused for a moment, his hands dropping to his sides. He stared at the holographic images of the Exo-Guardian suit, his mind racing. He hated admitting it, but Clark was right. "Fine," Stark said finally. "You want in, you read in, but this is my operation. We do things my way." Clark nodded. "Whatever it takes to stop this." Together, they dove into the mission, tracking down the trail of the stolen tech. The thieves, a splinter group of an international terrorist organization known as the Crimson Dawn, had managed to infiltrate Stark Industries and make off with one of the prototypes. Led by Barkaz Al, a former military strategist turned warlord, the Crimson Dawn was infamous for its ruthlessness and ambition. Their end game was world domination, and with the Exo-Guardian suit in their hands, they were closer than ever to achieving that goal. Days passed and Stark and his tech teams worked tirelessly, using every resource at their disposal to track down the stolen suit. Stark and Clark worked side by side, though. Their differing philosophies continued to clash. Stark believed that technological advancement was humanity as best hope for survival, while Clark remained wary, fearing that too much power in the wrong hands would lead to catastrophe. Late one night, as Stark and Clark pored over intel in the war room, a breakthrough came. Stark's team had traced the signal of the stolen prototype to a remote desert base in the Middle East, an old military installation that had been repurposed as the Crimson Dawn headquarters. "This is it," Stark said, eyes gleaming with determination. "Right away, found the..." Clark nodded, already preparing himself mentally for what was to come. "Tira, we need to move quickly before they have time to replicate the tech." Stark grinned. "Oh, done. Gee, worry, I've got a little surprise for them." Clark raised an eyebrow. "You'll see, Melanie." Stark's grin widened as he began packing his gear. "Let's all go. Show these guys what happens when they mess with the best." They arrived at the desert base under cover of night. Stark, suited up in his Iron Man armor, hovered above the sand, scanning the perimeter. Clark, still in his civilian attire, stood beside him, his superhuman senses on high alert. "This place is heavily fortified," Stark muttered, his HUD displaying dozens of armed guards, security drones, and automated defenses. They've gone all out." Clark's eyes narrowed as he focused on the compound. "There's a way in southwest corner there, says the gap in their patrol route." Stark nodded. "All right, we'll go in quiet, take them out, and disable the tech. Ready?" Clark gave him a curt nod. "I do this." Together, they moved swiftly and silently, avoiding detection as they made their way through the desert toward the compound. Clark's keen senses guided them past the guards, while Stark and his tech neutralized any security systems in their path. As they reached the heart of the compound, they finally came face to face with the Crimson Dawn's inner sanctum. Baroque Lazal, a towering figure clad in a modified version of the Exo-Guardian suit, stood at the center of the room, surrounded by his elite soldiers, each wearing a similar, albeit less advanced, version of the suit. "Stark," Barack Zal said, his voice deep and menacing. "Sparrow than expecting you." Stark's eyes narrowed. "Nice suit. Too bad you not gonna get to keep it." Zal chuckled darkly. "You really think you can stop me? You gave the world this technology, Stark. Now I am going to use it to take control." Clark stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This ends here. Zal, you don't know what you're replaying with." Barack eyes gleamed with malice as he raised his arm, the suit cess, weapons charging. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm playing with, Superman." Barack Zal's arm lit up, the power of the Exo-Guardian suit surging through its circuitry as weapons clicked into place. Energy beams hummed to life, crackling with an ominous glow. Stark instinctively raised his gauntlet, ready to counter, but he knew that this wasn't just any opponent. Zal had Stark's own technology, altered, enhanced, and designed for war. Clark moved first, his speed a blur to everyone else in the room. In less than a second, he was between Stark and Zal, catching the blast from Zal's energy cannon with his bare hands. The room trembled as the energy hit Clark's chest, dissipating harmlessly. His eyes glowed a fiery red as he turned his gaze towards Zal. "You don't want to do this," Clark said, his voice steady, calm, but carrying a weight of warning. Zal sneered. "You don't get it, Superman. The world isn't about heroes anymore. It's about power. And that got the ultimate weapon." He fired again, this time aiming for Stark, but Clark was faster, intercepting the blast and hurtling it back toward the ground. With a flick of his hand, the ground shook as the energy exploded harmlessly into the concrete floor. "Tony, shut down his suit," Clark shouted as he took a step forward, keeping Zal's focus on him. Stark's fingers flew over his suit chest console, accessing the override system he had mentioned earlier. He designed the Exo-Guardian suits with a failsafe, a remote shutoff in case they ever fell into the wrong hands. But Zal had tampered with the tech. Stark could see it in the way the energy was pulsing erratically through the suit as a frame. "Clark, he's modified the interface. I need time," Stark shouted. Clark gave a small nod and launched himself at Zal, moving faster than anyone could track. His fist collided with Zal's chest, sending the warlord flying into the wall with a thunderous crash. Metal and concrete shattered as Zal's sub-body hit the far side of the room, but he recovered quickly, the Exo-Guardian suit cushioning the impact. Zal grinned, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "That all you got?" With a roar, Zal launched himself at Clark, his modified suit amplifying his speed and strength. The two clashed in the center of the room, the force of their blows shaking the compound. Sparks flew as energy beams collided with superhuman strength. Each hit from Zal's armored fists sent shockwaves through the walls, but Clark stood firm, using his superior strength to keep Zal at bay. Stark, still working furiously on his suit, Size HUD cursed under his breath. Zal had built in layers of encryption and countermeasures, but Stark was one of the smartest men on the planet. He wasn't about to let some terrorists outwit him. He just needed a few more seconds. Suddenly, one of Zal's soldiers lunged at Stark from behind. Stark barely had time to react before the man's fist, encased in an Exo-Guardian knockoff, slammed into his chest plate. The impact sent Stark crashing into a pile of crates. He groaned, his vision blurring as sparks flew from his suit, damaged systems. The soldier advanced, his arm raised for another blow, but before he could strike, Clark appeared in a blur of motion, grabbing the soldier by the arm and flinging him across the room. The man hit the far wall with a sickening thud, his suit sparking as it malfunctioned. "Stay down," Clark warned before turning back to Zal. Zal, taking advantage of the brief distraction, activated a hidden panel in his suit. His gauntlet morphed into a massive cannon, glowing with deadly energy. "You can stop progress, Superman," he roared, aiming the cannon directly at Clark. Clark braced himself, ready to withstand the blasts. But at that moment, Stark's voice crackled through the comms.
"Got it."
Suddenly, Zaliel's suit powered down, the energy cannon fizzled out, and the glowing lights along his armor flickered and died. Zali's eyes widened in shock as he staggered backward, the once mighty suit now just dead weight. Stark had managed to override the system, rendering Zal's stolen power useless. "No," Zal shouted, his voice filled with fury. He ripped off his helmet, throwing it to the ground as if his sheer will could reignite the suit. This was supposed to be my victory. Clark stepped forward, his expression stern but not without sympathy. You wanted power, now you were powerless. It's sign over. But Zal wasn't. He finished with a crazed look in his eyes. He pulled a small, glowing device from his belt, a detonator. Stark's heart skipped a beat as he realized what it was. He shrieked the compound to blow. He shouted. Zal grinned through the blood on his face. If I can have the power, no one will. Without hesitation, Clark sped forward, grabbing the detonator from Zalia's hand and crushing it in his palm before Zal could press the button. But Zal, ever the strategist, had a backup plan with his suit. Center power down, he pulled a second detonator from his pocket and pressed it. The entire base began to rumble. Stark's HUD flashed red as his suit detected multiple explosions being triggered throughout the compound. Tony, we need to go. Clark shouted over the noise. Stark didn't need to be told twice. He activated his thrusters, lifting off the ground just as the wall started to cave in. Clark grabbed Zal, hoisting the defeated warlord over his shoulder before taking to the air himself. The two heroes shot out of the compound as the ground beneath them erupted in a series of massive explosions. The desert lit up with fire and debris as the compound was reduced to rubble. Stark and Clark landed a safe distance away, watching as the smoke and flames filled the night sky. Zal, still slung over Clark's shoulder, groaned in defeat. You'll never win, Zal muttered weakly. There will always be someone else someone stronger. Stark knelt beside him, his face hard, maybe, but it won to be you. He tapped a button on his gauntlet, signaling S.H.I.E.L.D. to send a recovery team for Zal and the remaining terrorists. As the dust settled and the emergency teams arrived, Clark turned to Stark. It's size done. Stark nodded, but there was a weariness in his eyes. Yeah, it's sent done. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the flames slowly died out. The mission was a success, but the cost weighed heavily on both of them. Stark had seen firsthand how easily his technology could be turned into a weapon of mass destruction, and Clark had witnessed how power, no matter its form, could corrupt even the most brilliant minds. I should have listened to you from the start, Stark admitted, his voice quieter than usual. I was so focused on making the world safer that I didn't have stopped to think about the consequences. Clark glanced at him, the faintest smile on his face. You were trying to help, but power, whether it's sight from technology or superhuman abilities, comes with responsibility. Stark chuckled softly, shaking his head. You sound like my dad. Well, he was right, Clark said, his smile fading, and so were you. Technology can help people, but only if it's used wisely. It's about finding that balance. Stark sighed, his gaze fixed on the smoldering ruins of the compound. I am going to put more restrictions on the Exo-Guardian program, stricter vetting, tighter control, no more mass production. Clark nodded approvingly. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the desert, Stark extended his hand to Clark. Thanks for saving my ass back there. Couldn't have done it without you. Clark shook his hand firmly. We're in this together. Tony, just remember sometimes it takes more than just technology to save the world. Stark grinned, his confidence returning. Yeah, well, do you get used to me asking for help? I am still the genius billionaire, playboy, philanthropist around here. Clark chuckled, wouldn't dream of it. With that, they turned and walked toward the waiting S.H.I.E.L.D. transport, their partnership. Though reluctant at first, now forged in the fires of battle. They had stopped a catastrophe, but both knew that the fight for the future was far from over. There would always be new threats, new challenges, and new ways to misuse power. But as long as men like Tony Stark and Clark Kent stood together, the world had a fighting chance.